Hi folks, Bill Hobson here, and at the outset of the video you're about to watch, I just want to give you a little bit of background, because along with The Big Impact and our weekly efforts to inject inspiring and uplifting conversations into our culture, I also host a podcast called Marriage Talk. You can see the sign over my shoulder. And that program is focused on exactly what the title says, marriages, relationships. And normally on that program, I am joined by a licensed therapist and counselor named Terry Ladico from Midland, Michigan, and he and his wife share a practice there. But on this episode of Marriage Talk, we welcome in Dr. Debi Silber, and she's the founder of the Post-Betrayal Transformation Institute and has such powerful insights. This interview that you're about to see was originally recorded just for Marriage Talk. And by the time we were done, I was so impressed and so convinced that this was vital information and insight for everybody, I decided to share it on The Big Impact as well. So enjoy this conversation. Enjoy might not even be the right word, but I hope this conversation benefits you or perhaps somebody that you know who was going through a very difficult time in life and in their relationship. The good news is there is hope. Here's our conversation with Dr. Debi Silber here on The Big Impact by way of the Marriage Talk podcast. Those of you who have listened to the Marriage Talk podcast for any length of time know that back throughout our history, we have frequently dealt with issues around betrayal and infidelity and the pain and the trauma that comes from all of that, and hopefully provided some helpful steps in building recovery, not just for yourself, but hopefully for your relationship as well. And I'm really excited to welcome onto the program Dr. Debi Silber. She is the founder of the Post-Betrayal Transformation Institute. And Dr. Debi, you have been deeply immersed in this world for a number of years. You've appeared on Fox and CBS. You've been on with Dr. Oz, and of course have put your thoughts in writing with your number one best-selling book, The Unshakable Woman: 4 Steps to Rebuilding Your Body, Mind, and Life After a Life Crisis. So that is my long-winded introduction to say thank you for joining us. And how did you first decide this was the direction you were going to go?
Yes, well, thank you so much for having me. You don't decide to study something like betrayal. You
Yeah.
kind of need to. So I've been in health, mindset, personal development this is my 30th year. And it was years ago, I had a horrible family betrayal, and I thought I did all the work to heal. And then there was another one, and this time it was my husband. And like anybody who's been through it, you're blindsided, you're devastated. And I just absolutely was so heartbroken. But I looked at the two experiences and I said, well, what's the commonality between the two? And I realized, I never had the right boundaries in place. It was never really about me. It was always about everybody else. So one of the first things I did was I got him out of the house and I said, okay, well, I'm going to learn my way out of this, and which is how I do a lot of things. And so from there, with 4 kids and 6 dogs and a full-time business, I enrolled in a PhD program, and it was in transpersonal psychology, the psychology of transformation and human potential. And while I was there, I did a study on betrayal. What holds us back? What helps us heal? And what happens to us physically, mentally, and emotionally when the people closest to us lie, cheat, and deceive? That study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries, which changed my health, my family, my business, my life.
And I want to dive into those discoveries. Let me make sure I fully understand. You dove into the academic study of all of this while you were still reeling from it. Is that the order of events?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow.
I just knew that I had to heal from this. And I vowed, I said, if I can move through this and heal, I'm taking everybody with me. That was the plan. I had no idea what it was going to look like. I didn't know what was going to show up. I just knew, okay, here I am. I'm a single mom now, and I have no idea how I'm going to pay for this, how I'm going to do this, any of it. But something drastic had to happen. And one of the most profound things I learned was that healing is always a choice. Whether you whether you heal yourself and move along, and that's what I did with my family. It simply wasn't an option to rebuild with them. Or if the situation lends itself, if you're willing, if you want to, you can rebuild something entirely new with the person who hurt you. And that's what I did with my husband. A few years ago, we married each other again as two completely different people. New rings, new vows, new dress, and our 4 kids is our bridal party.
You know, there are a number of people who are listening to our conversation right now who are a million miles away from that sort of storybook ending.
Mm-hmm.
And the concept of putting all the pieces back together again could seem as remote as taking a trip on Elon Musk's moon rocket, right?
Yes.
Um, the description that I've heard
Mm-hmm.
is that when that betrayal takes place, it is as if a baseball bat was taken to a wall of Legos
Mm-hmm.
and there are pieces everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And even though there may be an effort underway to put pieces together very slowly, one at a time, you're still stepping on some in the middle of the night in your bare feet. You're still finding some under the couch 2 years later, right? So this is not a simple paint by numbers project.
Not at all.
How
It's
was your experience with it, especially as you're learning it, as you're applying it?
Yeah, it was absolutely grilling. And people ask me all the time, they say, can trust be repaired? And my answer is no. Can it be rebuilt? Yes. And my book Trust Again is about that. It's just here's a visual. I look at trust as a brick wall, and that can take decades to build. And the only way to build it is brick by brick by brick. Every interaction to show that that person is trustworthy represents a brick in that brick wall. Then in one horrific moment or series of moments, the entire wall comes tumbling down. Now, you can absolutely stare at that pile of rubble and say, I don't have the least bit of interest in watching that thing get rebuilt again. However, if you want to rebuild that wall, the only way is the way it was rebuilt. It was built in the first place, brick by brick by brick. And what happens is the person who's been betrayed has to be willing to watch that brick wall be rebuilt, and the betrayer has to be a really good bricklayer.
Hmm.
What I see so often in the PBT, the Post Betrayal Transformation Institute, is we spend our time thinking, okay, well, this brick wall is shattered, and even though I didn't do the betrayal, you know what? It's just too uncomfortable. It's too messy. I'll rebuild it. No. And the study proved, and I'm happy to share what the discoveries were. But one of the things we found was there were 3 groups in the study who did not heal. And like one group was where they refused to accept their betrayal. Just they weren't having it. They weren't going there.
What do you mean? Like it didn't happen?
Like they just were not willing to let go of that story, let go of what the experience was, what it did to them, what it created for them. They had their story and they were sticking by it. And that was it. And I can show you where that shows up clearly in one of the discoveries. The other one was, we don't heal when we numb, avoid, distract ourselves. And I see this constantly. It's so painful that we numb, avoid, distract. We use food, drugs, alcohol, work, TV, keeping busy, anything to distract ourselves from what is so painful to feel or face. However, when we do that, we don't heal. And the third group was this was the group where the betrayer had very little consequences. So whether this was out of fear, financial fear, not wanting to break up a family, religious reasons, whatever it was, they tried desperately just to put it behind them without any real consequences. I only saw 2 things in this group: a further deterioration of the relationship, and this group by far was the most physically ill. You can't have your broken heart do that.
Yeah, I recently heard, and I would gladly give credit where it's due if I could remember who said it, but I cannot remember who said it. But the statement was, bitterness is like drinking poison and wishing somebody else got sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
The physical manifestations of the trauma and then letting it all remain inside and build up is something that it can haunt you for the rest of your days, right? It doesn't just dissipate.
Oh, not at all. And in fact, one of the discoveries was that there's a collection of symptoms so common to betrayal, physical, mental, and emotional, so common to betrayal, it's now known as post-betrayal syndrome.
Wow.
We have a quiz on our site to see to what extent people are struggling. We've had over 18,000 people take it. And and I'm happy to share. I pull the stats every once in a while to see what people are really struggling with and what shows up. But what's so interesting too is we've all heard time heals all wounds. I have the proof that when it comes to betrayal, that's simply not true. Betrayal only heals when we face it, feel it, heal it.
When when you're at the beginning stages of deciding whether you want to rebuild or not, what is the first step that you recommend? Is the first step to put yourself back together
Yeah.
before you move on to family concerns?
Oh, 100%. Because here's what I see all the time. We are so afraid, so often we're so afraid of that drastic change. So because of that, we just try and repair, and we just try and put it behind us, and we just try and go along with something so devastatingly painful. But what has to happen in order for the potential of a new relationship to be birthed is there's got to be a complete and utter death and destruction of the old in order to rebirth the new. And when I say death and destruction of the old, I'm talking about the old relationship, the old them, the old you.
Hmm.
But in doing that, you actually can rebirth something entirely new. And when with betrayal, you're actually creating a new identity. It lends itself to that, where you're taking the parts you love, leaving behind everything that doesn't serve. So here's an opportunity where you say, you know what, the old version of me allowed boundaries to get crossed. The old version of me didn't stick up for my needs. The old version of me never really took my needs seriously. I'm not doing that anymore. And this is where you're recreating all of the rules. The other person can simply not have any interest in that, but it doesn't matter. This is an opportunity for you to heal and rebuild. From there, we never know what'll show up. So often the other person can step up their game, or you can simply outgrow them.
You've done a great job of defining what the post-betrayal syndrome looks like.
Mhm,
Um, but when you are in it, it can
mhm.
sometimes be hard to recognize that you're in it.
Yes.
How how can somebody who's listening right now, who is really just reeling
Mhm.
from betrayal, come to grips with the fact that they may be immersed in this syndrome?
Yeah. Well, you know what? And I'm happy to go through some of the statistics, but one of the other discoveries was, and this is where they will see themselves so clearly, while we can stay stuck for years, decades, a lifetime, if we're going to fully heal, we will now move through what is proven and predictable 5 stages.
Mm.
So, and I'm happy to even go through the stages because this way everyone will know exactly where they are. So the first stage was like and by the way, when this was discovered, I mean, what was so exciting about this was now there's a roadmap and healing is predictable. So the first stage is like a setup stage. And I saw this with everybody, including me. If you imagine 4 legs of a table, the 4 legs being physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, what I saw with everybody was a real heavy lean on the physical and the mental and kind of neglecting the emotional and the spiritual. So what does that look like? Looks like we're really good at thinking and doing and kind of neglecting the feeling and being. The feeling and being is where our intuition lies. So we turn that down. That's not to say if you're busy, it's a recipe for betrayal. It's just what I saw. Stage 2, shock. By far the scariest stage. Here's D-Day, Discovery Day. And this is the breakdown of the body, the mind, the worldview. You've ignited the stress response. So now you're headed for every single stress related symptom, illness, condition, disease. Your mind is in a complete state of chaos and overwhelm. You cannot wrap your mind around what you've just discovered.
It's the mushroom cloud, right?
Yeah.
It's the moment. It's the
Oh, it's the
explosion.
moment. It is tattooed on your mind and on your heart. And you've also, your worldview is shattered. That's your mental model. These are the rules. This is how the world works. Don't go there. This person's safe. And in a moment, it's completely shattered. So here's truly where the bottoms out on you. You know, one of my study participants said, you know what it feels like? It feels like every negative emotion you can experience, getting punched in the gut and losing a child in a crowd, all at the same
Wow.
time.
Wow.
Devastating. And anybody who's been through it knows that moment, remembers that moment. And so, but think about it. If the bottom were to bottom out on you, what would you do? You'd grab hold of anything and everything you could to stay safe and stay alive. That's stage 3. It's the most practical stage. Survival instincts emerge. If you can't help me, get out of my way. How will I survive this experience? Who can I trust? Where do I go? How do I feed my kids? Like, it's as practical as that. Here's the trap. And this is where people get stuck. This is the most common stage to get stuck. Because survival, when you've figured out how to survive, because survival feels so much better than the shock and trauma of where you just came from, you're like, whew, okay, let me figure this out. Let me settle in here. And here's the thing. We have no idea there's even a stage 4 and stage 5. We think this is as good as it gets. Now, a few things happen. The first thing that happens is you start getting these small self benefits from being here. You get to be right. You get your story. You get someone to blame. You get a target for your anger. You get sympathy from everyone you tell your story to. You don't have to do the hard work of learning to trust again. Do I trust you? Do I trust you? Forget it. I won't trust anybody. And so what you're doing is you're planting some roots in this space. Now that you're planting some roots here, your mind starts doing things like, well, maybe you deserved it. Maybe you're not all that great. Maybe you're not who you know, this, that, the other thing, deeper roots. Then like energy attracts like energy. So now you're calling situations and circumstances and people towards you to confirm that this is where you belong. It gets deeper. I'll get you out of it though. Because you're so unhappy here, but you have no idea there's anything better, you resign yourself to thinking, well, this is as good as it gets. So I better make some peace with this. So here's where you start using food, drugs, alcohol, work, TV, keeping busy. And here's the thing. You do that a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I can see someone 20 years out and say, hey, that drinking or that emotional eating, do you think that has anything to do with that betrayal? And they say, oh my gosh, that happened years ago. But all they've done is put themselves in a perpetual holding pattern this whole time. And that's why stage 3 is the most common place for people to land and stay. However, yeah, so if you're willing to let go of all those small self benefits, grieve, mourn the loss, do a bunch of things, you move to stage 4. Stage 4, this is where transformation begins. Stage 4 is finding and adjusting to a new normal. Here's where you acknowledge, I cannot undo my betrayal, but I can control what I do with it. And I always liken this to, if you've ever moved to a new house, office, condo, apartment, whatever, all your stuff isn't there. It's not quite cozy yet, but it's going to be okay. When you're in this space, you're actually turning down the stress response. You're not physically healing just yet, but you're not causing the massive physical damage you were causing in stage 2 and stage 3. And here's what's so interesting about stage 4 also. If you were to move, you don't take everything with you. You don't take the things that don't represent who you want to be. If your friends weren't there for you, here's where you've just outgrown them. And it's so common. People say all the time, I've had these friends for 10, 20, 30 years. Is it me? Yes, it is.
Well, keeping the moving analogy alive, there are also some things that 9 years after you've moved into a house, you realized you never unpacked.
That's it.
You never needed them.
Right? You don't need them. And I see this all the time with friends in this stage. When you've made this new mental space your home, you've made it okay. You move into stage 5, the most beautiful stage. And this is healing, rebirth, and a new worldview. The body starts to heal. You didn't have the bandwidth for self-love, self-care, eating well, exercise. You were surviving. Now you do. Yeah. You've turned down the stress response enough that the body heals. Your mind heals. You're making new rules and boundaries based on where you've been. And you have a new worldview based on your entire experience. And the 4 legs of the table, remember in the beginning, it was just physical, mental. By this point, we're solidly grounded. because we're focused on the emotional and the spiritual too. Those are the 5 stages.
Well, that's powerful. And I want to talk about the friends factor here for a
Mhm,
moment, not the TV show, the friends that we have in our lives.
mhm,
Uh, there's a great example in the book of Job where he's enduring the greatest trauma anybody could ever imagine, and that is the loss of basically everyone and everything in his world.
mhm,
And he has some friends that come along. There's 3 of them, and they are not helpful. They are giving very poor advice. And finally, he just goes off on them and he's like, "Who are you people? Why are you telling me these things?"
mhm,
My question for you is that a lot of people who are in that mushroom cloud of
mhm,
trauma, who are
mhm.
really going through it, almost by default, can take whatever their friends say as good advice because they're just hurting and they know their friends mean well and they're trying and they're saying things and I know they love me.
Mhm.
How does someone who is in the mushroom cloud of betrayal
Mhm.
discern whether or not the friends around them are a positive influence and giving them the kind of advice that will actually help?
Yeah, it's such a great question. You know, we see in the PBT Institute, the wrong support does more harm than good.
Yeah.
Because what it so often does is it invalidates what the person who's been betrayed is going through. For example, we see this all the time. Let's just take an example of, let's say there's a narcissist. Let me give you a typical example I see all the time. Narcissistic husband has an affair. She's able to drag him to couples counseling. Let's just say that counselor is not highly skilled in how to heal from in helping someone heal from betrayal. Well, she can look, here's the narcissist, very charismatic, crocodile tears. And the counselor can look at the woman who's been betrayed and says, my gosh, you know what? If you just learn to communicate better. And she's thinking, what? Right? Or let's say the same scenario, let's take the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law doesn't want to see you broken up. So she'll say, oh, come on, you're good already, right? Or your friends want you better. So they're like, oh, just get over it, move on, whatever it is. We have to be ruthless about who we spend our time with because transformation is a very personal process. And people around you, here's the thing, they're not going to like it. They liked when they knew where you stood. They liked it when they can kind of control you a little bit. They don't like it that now you're creating new rules and new boundaries and new everything. So much is coming up. And I also see where some people, they don't know how to handle it. They just don't know how to deal. They
Yeah.
don't know how to cope. They
Yeah.
think it's contagious, whatever it is. So they stay away. And it's just a very personal process, and we found that even the wrong support, where it's like the in it awful club, that doesn't work either, because as you start to heal you kind of don't belong. So we've taken everything that doesn't work and excluded that from the community and included just what does, what the research proved, what we found doesn't work, what I would have desperately wanted. So that's what we have in there.
Yeah, and I want people to understand. I want you to hear what Dr. Silber just said, because it's entirely possible that you have really well-intentioned friends.
Mhm.
They do love you. They do care about you. They're not trying to harm you, but they don't know what to do. So that's a I mean, I could really want to fix your car.
Mhm.
You're stranded on the side of I-75, and I pull up behind you, and I get out, and you're like, "Oh, thank goodness you're here." And when I ask you what's wrong with the car and you say, well, it doesn't start, I can go, oh, well, that is a problem. And then I have no skills beyond that, other than to say, I'm sorry that your car is broken down. I'll give you a ride. The in the faith-based foundational world,
Mhm.
one of the things that you will often hear people say is, hey, listen, I know you two are going through a tough time, and we're going to pray for you to get back to where you were.
Mhm.
And my answer to that has been for a lot of years, oh, please don't do that,
Mhm.
because where they were was not a very good place, or we wouldn't be in trauma.
I agree.
So
Oh.
thank you for caring, but how about you pray that we'll be better than we ever were before?
Mhm.
It's a big difference in trying to get back to misery, right, which led to betrayal,
Mhm.
trying to move forward and go from the minor leagues to the major leagues, so to speak.
I completely agree. And to your point, Today actually is my 30th anniversary. But it's, only a few years since we're remarried.
What are you
And
doing talking to me on your 30th anniversary?
we're celebrating this afternoon, this evening. We have it all worked out. Don't you worry.
Good.
So, but here's the thing. I wouldn't want that old version of us. We're having more fun. We're closer than ever. Now it's the best relationship we've ever had. But we could never have this if we didn't completely blow up the last one. Now, I'm not saying for a minute it was my fault, because I didn't do the betraying. We always want to take responsibility for wherever we were, in that experience. But that doesn't mean take the blame for it. However, it is the perfect opportunity. Trauma lends itself. Trauma is the setup for transformation if we use it appropriately. There are so many people who just stay bitter, stay resentful, stay miserable, stay stuck. And here's the thing, whether you're with that person or not, you can recreate the strongest, wisest, most magnificent version of you. And that actually reminds me of the third discovery, which is healing. Originally, I was studying something called post-traumatic growth, which is kind of the upside of trauma, how any trauma, death of a loved one, disease, natural disaster, whatever, leaves you potentially with a new awareness, perspective, or insight that you didn't have. Now, I had been through death of a loved one. I had been through disease. And I was like, betrayal feels very different for me. I didn't want to assume. So I asked all my study participants, I said, if you've been through other traumas, does betrayal feel different for you? Unanimously, they said, oh my gosh, it's so different. And here's why. Because it feels so intentional, we take it so personally. So the entire self has to be rebuilt. Rejection, abandonment, belonging, confidence, worthiness, trust. These are gigantic. They all need to be rebuilt. So it needed its own name. So that full and complete healing through stage 5 is now called post-betrayal transformation, which is available to everyone.
Uh, we often think of this concept of betrayal really in one context, and that is an unfaithful spouse. Are there other forms of betrayal that would fall under this heading that would also result in the kind of trauma you've been describing?
Oh, 100%. I mean, like my family betrayal. The way it works is I define it as the breaking of a spoken or unspoken rule. Every relationship has them. For example, we had an agreement. I was going to show up. We were going to have a conversation. If I didn't, I would have betrayed you. Now, it wouldn't have really upset you to the extent of something way more involved, but it's still a betrayal. The way it works is the more you depend, the more you trust that person, the deeper the betrayal. So for example, a child who's completely dependent on their parent and the parent does something awful, that's going to have a different impact than, let's say, your coworker taking credit for your idea, your best friend sharing your secret. You see, still a betrayal, but the magnitude changes based on the level of trust, dependency, heart.
When you look back at your beginning stages of learning all of this, of
Yeah.
really pursuing it officially, and then putting a book together and doing what you do now, which is really an entire service to people in trauma, are you at all surprised by the explosive growth in this topic? I mean, in one ways, in one aspect, it's really kind of cool to see, and in another aspect, it's really sad to see. I think you understand what I mean. Are you surprised at all by this?
I certainly didn't discover betrayal, but we have a very unique and proven way to heal from it. So I'm just thrilled there's a roadmap. And in my experience, it was so exciting to see that there's a way out of this. And I remember I created the Betrayal to Breakthrough program, which literally walks people through the 5 stages, and that just blew up. And I said, okay, well, how do I leverage me? And I started certifying coaches so they can have deeper transformations with their clients and patients. And then I was like, okay, well, what would happen if we put everything that works under one roof? And that became the PBT Institute. So betrayal certainly isn't new. But my reason for teaching what I'm teaching is so people know, should you experience this, you don't have to stay stuck, not for a minute. There's a way out.
Over the last couple of years, my wife has been connected with a lot of women who are hurting. They're hurting for a number of reasons, but betrayal would be on the list. And my wife's got just a wonderful way of communicating with them and kind of guiding them along the lines of many of the things that you've been talking about. Um, One of the things, though, that I still can't quite wrap my head around is how someone can know, whether it's the wife or the husband in a relationship, when the relationship has a chance.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've talked about how the early stages of transformation beyond betrayal
Mhm.
should focus on you putting yourself back together again, because you've been kicked in the gut, in the teeth, whatever body part you want to allude to. But at some point, then, as you did, and as you've mentioned, you have this decision about what are we going to do about the relationship? Is it
Yeah.
worth saving? Can it be saved? Do both sides want to save it?
Mhm.
What would you recommend as sort of a barometer for knowing whether or not this has a chance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you said it. It's about us first. We need to heal and rebuild ourselves. Number one, I teach something. It's called the window of willingness, and it's where you know where you're the most likely to the least likely to heal and rebuild with someone when it's safe and in your best interest, and when it's not to. So, just real briefly, if you imagine a window with the widest open, best case scenario after a betrayal is deep remorse, apology, restitution, empathy. So it sounds something like, oh my gosh, what the heck did I do? I am so sorry. How can I make it up to you? Now, of course, with betrayal, it's going to take a lot more than that, but you're off to a good start. Complete and total ownership. You could feel the window closing a bit with this next level. And with level 2, the window's closing. You know it's closing when you hear the word because. Well, I did it because, blah, blah, blah. I said it because, blah, blah, blah. Now, this person, is kind of owning it, but they're making excuses. You still have something to work with here if you choose. You could feel the window closing a lot more with this next one, level 3. You know it's coming when you hear the word you. Well, I did it because you, blah, blah, blah. I said it because you, blah, blah. I call this the two-sided slap. You get betrayed on one hand, there's the slap on the one side, and then you get blamed for it. You have very little to work with here. Very little to work with here. And you've been doing this if you've been banging your head against the wall trying to prove and explain and express, falling on deaf ears. Level 3, very close cousins with level 4. And this is the window is sealed shut. This person is unwilling to take any responsibility. They are blaming you, or, it's just, and it's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. You really need help. So, when you're working with a level 1 and 2, and I'm not just saying the words, the actions match the words. When you're working with a level 1 and level 2, completely up to you, but you have something to work with. Level 3 and level 4, at this point in their journey, you're wasting your time.
Hmm. Well, that's really powerful to be able to kind of filter that down. And I, without betraying any confidences, there was a situation where my wife was working with a lady that she had been connected with, and she had heard, "Oh, I wouldn't have done it if you hadn't fill in the blank."
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
both of us were like, "What?
yeah,
What? Where do I find him for the beating?"
yeah. And
Right?
the craziest part is over time we start believing that. And
Ooh,
that's what so deeply roots us in that stage 3.
yeah.
And it's designed because that person cannot own it, cannot take responsibility, so they're just throwing it on you like a bad game of hot potato. Do not believe it for a minute.
Do you still, this is a very personal question, you're
Mhm.
welcome to not answer it. In your own relationship, do you still have trigger moments? Is there something that can come along that can all of a sudden send you back to where you were for a while?
Yeah, the triggers, what happens with triggers when you are truly doing the work, the triggers can show up to remind you of how far you've come. And what happens is it's not that the triggers aren't there, they no longer hold the same emotional charge that they did.
Mm.
Now, having said that, I still will not willingly put myself into a scenario that may be uncomfortable for me. That's by choice, because why would I? So I'm recreating this whole post betrayal experience around who am I now? What do I need? And I'm not tolerating anything that doesn't serve.
Yeah. So you've prepared yourself and you've built some boundaries that you already know. Why would I cross this boundary? If I do that, it just hurts,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And it also, here's the thing too, one of the biggest things that I know personally that I've done is I was ruthless with who I was personally creating. And I remember thinking to myself many times where it would have been easier maybe to be like, ah, forget it, what's the big deal, don't speak up, don't do this. And I said, "Mm-mm-mm. If I'm not committed to this new version of me, if I'm gonna, lessen my standards, that means I'm willing to lessen his, and I'm not doing it.
Hmm.
So if it's a no for me, if I'm unwilling to show up as my old self, I'm unwilling to see him as his old self. And you have to hold yourself to that. Otherwise, it's just more of the same. I mean, yes, that person woke up and understands and all these things. But if you are truly creating something new, it's like building a brand new muscle.
Transformation, which is built into the name of your institute, transformation is not just surviving, it's thriving. It's right. It's a complete turning of the page to a new life.
Yeah, it's when you're taking what had become your life story and you make it a pivotal chapter of your story.
So there are some who may be hearing that you have founded the Post Betrayal Transformation Institute and wondering if it's a bricks and mortar campus where one needs to attend and get a dorm room and set up shop. So what is the experience like for somebody who's taking in our conversation and says, I need that sort of input?
Yes, thank you. And it actually was a brick and mortar space, and it was wonderful. And we had it for a while, and even the local people wanted to be able to visit online. So now it's completely online, and we serve people all over the world. So in there, we have our programs, which literally walk you through, the 5 stages of betrayal, 24/7 access to. We have live daily classes with our certified coaches. Coaches are certified in and then they specialize in topics: narcissism, reconciliation, chronic pain, sex and porn addiction, health. And so they're all certified in moving someone through the 5 stages, but they're coming in with 10, 20, 30 plus years of their own areas of expertise. So they teach daily classes. Members can see them privately as well. We have master classes with the most brilliant experts who help. They come in to teach body-based activities to release the trauma. I mean, I have access to the most incredible doctors and therapists and healers and thought leaders. They come in to teach master classes. I'm in there doing open Q&A, and we have forums, which are all there to lift and inspire. You're in a club you never wanted to be in, but if you're in there, you're with people who are there to help you lift and inspire. And we have clubs. We have a men's club. We have a divorce club. We have all different kinds of hobby clubs. So the idea is it's like training wheels. You're with us until you don't need it anymore. The idea is to get you from that place of post-betrayal syndrome to that space of post-betrayal transformation. And that's, from that place, that's where, you have the best new relationships and new businesses and new lives and new levels of health. So it's just an incredible place.
I've been thinking about this last year plus of pandemic world, and we've talked in other podcasts and in other programs about the impact on business and on life and on all those things. How has the pandemic impacted marriages and maybe the issue of betrayal? I would be interested to learn. I have my own theories, but you're the doctor. You tell me.
What I've seen, I've seen, we've seen it every which way. We have seen couples have no other choice but to spend time with each other and figure stuff out. We have also seen in that they are finally not as distracted as they used to be. They have a hard time facing themselves, and there's this kind of reckoning that's going on where it's like, okay, what now? Who am I? What do I want? What am I doing? So it can completely strengthen and renew a relationship or completely tear it down. We've seen everything.
So you could look across the living room and say, "Hey, I really like this person," or you could look across the living room and say, "Who in the world is that person?" Because you've been running at such a high speed for so long, you've never really looked at each other since maybe the honeymoon ended.
Yeah, yeah. So we see everything. You never know what's going to show up, but uh, sometimes that breakdown is the only way to that breakthrough.
Powerful, powerful insights, Doctor. We'll put the notes to, or the link to both of your books in our podcast notes for those who are consuming this via podcast. Otherwise, where would you have people go to begin the journey of healing after betrayal?
Oh, thank you so much. The first step is take the quiz to see to what extent you're struggling with betrayal from your betrayal. And you can just find that at the PBT, as in post betrayal transformation, thepbtinstitute.com/quiz.
I can see why they are inviting you onto the national shows. You are very well spoken. And I think that you come to this, if you had not come to this from a background of personal experience, I don't think it would have mattered as much. This doesn't lend itself to a cold clinical analysis. This is life experience. This is real stuff. And while we would never wish uh, trauma and betrayal on anybody, it's pretty encouraging to see what you've done with it. And congratulations on your 30th anniversary. I feel like maybe I should send over some flowers because you've taken an hour of your anniversary day with me. But nothing but the best for you and your husband as you celebrate, and keep on helping people. It's powerful, powerful indeed.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.